Good afternoon, Washington, D.C. This is Tony Browder with another edition of the Browder File Show here on WPFW. Today is a special day. Today is the 2nd of July, and the station has decided to dedicate the programming from 12 noon to midnight to two giants within the world of African liberation. Today, the 2nd of July, is the 100th birthday of both Patrice Lumumba and Medgar Evers. And although an ocean separated these two men, these two freedom fighters, their souls were born to struggle for the liberation of Africans on the continent and Africans in the United States of America. And while Medgar Evers and Patrice Lumumba were not personally acquainted, their lives and their struggles often commemorated together due to parallels in their commitment to fighting for the self-determination and liberation of African people. So WPFW and Friends of the Congo celebrate this centennial of this parallel vision with From Mississippi to the Congo, 100 years of Lumumba and Medgar. And so I'm pleased today to add to this celebration by focusing on the life and the legacy of Medgar Evers, who was born on this day, but was struck down on June the 12th, 1963. He was murdered as he was getting out of his car, shot in the back by a Klansman. It said that the bullet pierced his back, went through his heart, and died later that day. It's believed that under normal circumstances, as Mr. Evers was doing his work, fighting for the liberation of his people, fighting for their rights to vote, fighting for their rights to integrate colleges, schools, universities, and other establishments in the state of Mississippi, his life was under constant threat. And so he was often given protection by police and the FBI, who sometimes followed him home to make sure he got home safely. But on the night that he was murdered, mysteriously, neither the FBI or the police were nearby. And it just so happened that was the night that a Klansman laid in wait and struck this brother down. It's also important that we understand that Patrice Lumumba, who, as he was fighting to liberate his people in the Congo from Belgian forces, that he was also killed on January the 17th, 1961, in a coup that we now know was indirectly led by the CIA. Reports have come out to indicate that. And there is a incredible film that just came out recently called Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat. And it discusses the role that the U.S. government and the CIA played in using Black musicians, jazz musicians, Louis Armstrong and hosts of others to travel throughout Africa. And they were used as a front to allow other forces to come in and destabilize the countries that they were sharing their musical talents with. So I think it's safe to say that here in the United States, as well as on the continent of Africa, the lives of men and women who were struggling for freedom and liberation were cut short by forces here in Washington, D.C. in the United States of America. So it's so critically important that we honor those people who have given their lives. There was a book and a film about the murder of Medgar Evers. They both were titled Ghosts of Mississippi. And so what we know is that these films just introduce a public to a subject matter, but they don't really give us, more details about the lives of these men and women. And so on today's show, I'm going to be talking with two guests who are familiar with the struggle for African liberation in the American South, and they are familiar with the works of Medgar Evers. My guests today are a dynamic duo of of attorneys and just incredible souls. We have on our show today attorney Faya Rose Touré, who was born in North Carolina. She graduated from Johnson C. Smith University and Harvard Law School. She worked on a number of high-profile civil rights cases, including a case which was the largest civil rights case in history, where she won more than $1 billion in damages for Black farmers from the United States Department of Agriculture. Sister Touré is also the first African-American female judge in the state of Alabama. She's joined by her husband, Senator Hank Sanders, who was born in Alabama. He graduated from Talladega College and Harvard Law School. He served as the first African-American state senator from the Alabama Black Belt. He served in that position from 1983 to 2018. And the two of them established the law firm of Chestnut, Sanders and Pettaway. And this dynamic duo of lovers of African people, of justice, are probably most famous for establishing the annual Bridge Crossing Jubilee, which is held in Selma, Alabama. They have established the National Voting Rights Museum, the Ancient African Slavery and Civil War Museum, and the 21st Century Leadership Movement. So they have been involved. They are committed to the struggle and the victory of African people. So let me welcome to the Browder File, Faya Rose Sanders and Hank Sanders. Good afternoon. How are you?
I feel much better than now that I see my friend I haven't seen in quite a few months. So good to be here and to see you looking well and happy.
Well, sis, you're looking good too. I mean, you're really looking good, and it's glad to see the two of you together. I have to say that you all are, one of my favorite couples. I mean, you all are joined at the hip, and you've been committed to this work for decades. You work harder than people half your age, and it doesn't appear that you're slowing down. So, Hank Sanders, how you doing, my brother? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing great, and it's just so good to be able to share this moment with you. You are one of our heroes as well.
Yes, without a doubt.
Well, let's just say this is a mutual admiration society,
Yes.
and so let's talk about the work that you all have been doing for decades to honor the spirit of freedom fighters such as Medgar Evers. What I recall when I first met you all, maybe a decade and a half ago, at one of the Bridge Crossing Jubilees, you all were responsible for honoring the memory of the activities that occurred at the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday. Can you give us a little history about that event and why you all were determined to make sure that that moment in history was not forgotten?
Well, on February the 18th, 1965, there was a lot of activity around voting across the South and across the Alabama Black Belt. And on that day, they decided to hold a night march, and there was a particular reason for holding a night march, and that is because Reverend James Orange with SCLC, they had him in jail, and the Black people the Black leaders received some reliable information that the Klan was going to not break in, he was going to the jail, they were going to let him out, and they were going to kill him. So they called a night, Black leaders led by Albert Turner called a night meeting. And then they were going and put a vigil around the jail for the entire night so that the Klan would be more difficult for them to try to kill him. So he ended up being shot on that occasion. I won't go into the detail. And he died a week later in Selma. And then so the people who were going to Montgomery, most folks think that was about voting rights alone, but that really the urgency of the moment was called by Jimmy Lee Jackson's death. And so 600 people left Selma on that Sunday morning to march all the way to Montgomery to confront Governor George Wallace as they could. And that's when, after they crossed the bridge, it was a lot of law enforcement, state troopers, sheriff deputies, and then they would deputize any citizen who want to, and they began to beat those people, the marchers, with clubs, and had horses where they were riding over them, and they had tear gas, they had all of that. And the street poets immediately call it Bloody Sunday because it was so much blood on the street that Sunday. And after that, you work through the Selma to Montgomery March and eventually the Voting Rights Act in August 6, 1965. All of these things were tied together. So it was like a culmination of a struggle that had been going on for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add one thing that I think is critical, because a lot of times our leaders are killed by obvious, overt. But in fact, Jimmy Lee Jackson survived the gunshots. He was operated on by a Black doctor here in Selma at the Black hospital.
Good Samaritan.
Good Samaritan. And I'm told by a nurse who is still living that after the first operation, a white doctor came into the hospital and said he needs another operation. And Jimmy Lee Jackson never got off of that operating table. The nurse who tells that story is still in Selma. And that's a story that we don't tell as much. But I think it's critical, Tony, because there's many ways to kill. And it's not just through gunshots and assassination attempts. Yeah.
And if I recall now, Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot as he was protecting his grandfather.
That's right.
Who was being beaten by a police officer.
His grandfather, who was named Keisha Lee, and his mother, both of them, he was protecting both of them. In fact, he was saying after they were beating him, he said, I just want to take him to the doctor. That's all I wanted to do. And they shot him, and in the stomach, he started running, and then they beat him after he had been shot as he ran.
And Tony, unlike Medgar Evers, who we're going to get into that, it took 30 years, but finally his killer was brought to justice. Years after Jimmy Lee Jackson died, his killer was brought to quasi-justice. He spent 3 months in jail for killing Jimmy Lee Jackson.
Is that right?
Why
3 months? Did he die in jail or was he released?
No, because the Black district attorney allowed him to plea bargain for 3 months.
Is that, Lord have mercy?
Lord have mercy, yes. And wait a minute, Tony. I think you know Jerubu Hill out of Mississippi. When we found that he was about to be released in less than 3 months, we actually went down to some lower part of Alabama to protest it. So he didn't even spend the full 3 months in jail.
So, well, tell me, you all are in Alabama, and Alabama so closely parallel Mississippi in terms of the abuse that was heaped upon African people. Your work closely parallels that of Medgar Evers and his brother and his wife and other colleagues. How do you, what is your motivation? What drives you to face this seemingly relentless opposition, to fight forces far more powerful than you, and to maintain your grit and determination? What's the secret? How do you do it?
Let me make a joke about it. When you're crazy, you don't know your own limitations, so you keep exceeding them.
And my mantra is freedom is in the struggle and victory is in the fight. So as long as I'm struggling, as long as I'm fighting, I just got the Supreme Court, that state of Alabama just handed down a Supreme Court case Friday, right? In the middle of my youth camp, I get this decision that the cops who illegally arrested me Um, the Supreme Court of Alabama said it's okay, they have immunity.
Hmm.
So we are facing what I consider an emerging police state, not just in Alabama, but throughout this country. And it's not just from the federal level, because we know what the agenda of the Trumpites are, but in these southern states, Mississippi and Alabama, they're also passing laws and making decisions at the state Supreme Court level that is actually depriving us or taking away many of the rights. So we don't have any choice but to keep struggling. If you you got that beautiful grandson, I love him, he's beautiful. If we care anything about our children and their
Yes.
children, we have no choice but to fight.
So, is that what motivated you, the both of you all, to go into law? I know Medgar Evers um, attempted to enroll in law school at the University of Mississippi, but he was barred because they didn't admit black folk. So, did you see law as a viable means of addressing some of the ills of society?
Not I. Not me.
Well, I did. I was in, I think I was in the 7th grade when the Brown versus Board of Education case came out saying that it was unconstitutional for black children to be barred by law from going to school with white children. And so Tony, I was a person who just loved to read. I read everything I got, everything I could get. And my mother worked for this rich white man in his house. And she would bring home their leftover newspapers and leftover magazines, but she brought them home. Now we lived in a 3-room house, Tony, and we didn't have.
We
didn't even have a. Not only did we not have anything in the house, we didn't have an outhouse. You had to go behind the Chinaberry tree. So she brought them home for us to use, and I read about Thurgood Marshall. And every Friday, our teachers was asking you what you're gonna be when you grow up. And I don't remember now what I used to say, but I remember when I went in and I said that day, stood up in the class and said, I'm gonna be a lawyer when I grow up. And the whole class just started laughing. And I started crying. And the more I cried, the more they laughed, the more they laughed, the more I cried. Until the teacher finally, she couldn't make them stop and she couldn't make me stop crying. She came over, Tony, and put her arms around me and made me help me to sit down. When I sat down, I said that I was going to be a lawyer if it was the last thing I did. But I also made another commitment that I wasn't going to tell anybody that I was going to be a lawyer. That's how I came to be a lawyer, because I read about Thurgood Marshall and because they laughed at me.
My stories are not romantic or eventful at all, Tony. Never thought about being a lawyer. Just didn't know quite what I wanted to be. But was fortunate enough to get a little scholarship or go to a program at Harvard Law School one summer, and had no intent still of becoming a lawyer. Returned to Johnson C. Smith my senior year and couldn't figure out what in the world I wanted to be. I know I didn't want to be a teacher or a secretary because a nurse, because I was programmed as a woman in those directions. So I was really rebelling. But luckily, for some reason, I made an A that summer at the law school. So when I got ready to make plans for my future, I had no future job. And so I said, well, good, I got an A at Harvard. Maybe I'll just apply there to go to law school. And that's what I did. Not out of a purpose, not out of a sense of mission. Just couldn't think of nothing else better to do at the time.
Well, I would say this, that even though you couldn't think of what you wanted to do with your life, a higher power had a good idea of what you were going to do and made sure that you met your future husband at Harvard. And then you all came to Selma and have been making history in Selma ever since,
But
right?
Tony, I didn't think about being a lawyer, but I knew after working with the children in Harlem, because that's my first community work, working with the kids in Harlem. That's where I wrote my first play, my first musical. And I knew that I wanted to change the world. I knew I wanted to change the lives of marginalized and Black people. So the law just became one a tool in that box. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I still I multitask even at 80 years old, because the law is not my passion. It's just a tool in the box to achieve African liberation.
All right. Well, I have to say that both of you all have used all the tools that you've been given quite well. You've created numerous organizations. You do excellent work, and you all, you all should be honored more than you have been. It's said that a prophet or a leader is never truly appreciated in their lifetime in their hometown. So I know with all the good work that you've been doing, you've ticked off a lot of people, and you've met with a lot of adversity, but you all have remained steadfast, and I respect that, I honor that, and I know, that there's a spirit that is working through you all and through people like you that serves to inspire anyone who's looking to improve their lives. And it was through you all that I had the opportunity to meet Sister Amelia Boynton, who most people don't know of. Can you spend a few minutes and tell us about the life of this incredible Black woman?
But before we go there, I want to go back to the point you made about Mississippi. That the fact that Medgar Evers, I think it was in 1954 when he was not allowed, in spite of his genius, he was not allowed to go to the University of Mississippi. But it's ironic because our daughter by marriage, she was a professor, a law professor at that university, that same law school. In fact, I think she was an assistant dean years later.
Really?
Yes. And then heck, you can speak about Amelia Boynton.
Well, Amelia Boynton began as a 13-year-old girl, or she might have been younger than 13.
She was 9 years
Because
old.
when her mother was going out trying to register people after the 19 and
It was
the
before.
19th Amendment.
It was before.
Well, we can, yeah, you can tell your story. I'll tell mine.
Well, you all can discuss the details later on, but she
Okay.
was 9 years old when she
Yeah,
set about the business to register people to vote with their
Yeah.
mother.
yes, yes, her mother did, and so in 1929, after graduating from Tuskegee, she came to Selma as a, they didn't call him a farm agent, home agent, I think. And another man had already started the Dallas County Voters League in the mid 1920s. What's his name?
C.J. Adams.
C.J. Adams. And they began working, trying to register folks in the 1920s. And they continued all the way into the 1960s.
Mhm.
And he died in 1963. And she continued as long as she lived. And she died at 110. And she was still on the front line fighting for our people, waging the resistance.
And she was on the bridge. People talk about John Lewis, but she was like 3 or 4 lines behind him, and she was brutally beaten. She really could have been killed and was nearly killed on that bridge.
I have been able to identify her in one of the photographs of the
Yes.
beating. She's wearing a trench coat and she's
That's
down
her.
on the ground and the cop is standing over her.
Mm-hmm.
So tell our listeners, I had the opportunity to meet her via the work that I was doing with you all years ago. And she was about 100 at that time, and her mind was sharp as a tack.
Yes, yes.
But if I'm not mistaken, I believe I was told that she was the person who wrote a letter to Dr. King inviting
Yes.
him to come to Selma, and that's how he became involved
Yes.
in this effort.
Yes, she wrote 2 letters. At the time, she was a part of a group called the Courageous Eight. And she wrote the first letter because Annie Cooper, who was featured in the movie Selma, played by Oprah Winfrey. She first wrote the first letter to Dr. King because Miss Cooper had been beaten, and all the women that worked at nursing home or were done nursing home, one had been cattle prodded because they were at the courthouse trying to register to vote, and they had all been fired. It was just a great act of unity because the owner attacked 2 women, but all 40 of those women walked off that job, knowing that their families might not have the necessities. So that's the first letter. Then she wrote the second letter. It was the second letter that really, I think, invoked King to come. The 3 little girls and the 2 black boys had been killed in Alabama, and that's when he came after that. I guess 2 years. Still took him another year to come.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But Dr. King never came anywhere where people were not already actively engaged in fighting for justice.
Okay, and it's that effort of people in the community fighting for justice that's so critically important. That's what Medgar Evers was doing in Mississippi. That's what you all have been doing in Alabama. So as 2 attorneys, one was a judge and one was a state senator, as 2 attorneys who've been in the fight, in the thick of the fight, look at where we are now, and tell me, where do you see we are headed, and what should we be doing now in light of where we are headed?
Well, first, I think it's important to understand that every time some progress was made by Black people in this country, there was always a reaction, a reactionary movement that fought against that progress, and that's true after slavery ended in these United States. We instead of freedom, we ended up with Jim Crow and segregation, and so after the movement in the 1960s, we made tremendous progress because we had the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that said segregation, legal segregation was unconstitutional. Then we had the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then a series of cases that was all there. So progress was being made very slowly over a period of time, but there was always an opposition to that progress. And that progress picked up a lot of steam when the Supreme Court of the United States started gutting that 1965 Voting Rights Act. And also, progress picked up again when the Supreme Court started with other cases. And Trump's election speeded up the attacks on that progress. And so we have come to a point that's really a terrible point, first, because no group of people have worked harder to try to make the ideals that were set forth in the Declaration of Independence to make them a reality in the democracy, to make it a full democracy rather than a shell of a democracy. And so when you fight that hard to get in, and then you see that democracy not just slipping away, but rushing away, because dictatorship is coming, it's not just on its way, it's here in certain form, and it's going to continue to get worse.
Tony, I just want to answer that in terms of not the problem, but where I think we need to go towards the solution. And I want to go back to what happened in Mississippi back in Medgar Evers' lifetime, when there was fierce discrimination, not just discrimination and segregation, but a lot of deaths. Herbert Lee was killed by a state legislature a black farmer who was merely trying to engage in the effort to register black people to vote. And one thing they decided to do, and I forgot this was written by us in one of the Jubilee books years ago, but I almost want to read it verbatim.
Go ahead.
Um, it is clear that racist opposition to black voting rights in Mississippi is so ferocious, so violent, so widespread that only by uniting all of the state's civil rights organizations into a coordinated effort is there any hope of success. So they formed an organization, the NAACP, SNCC, and CORE formed the Council of Federated Organizations called COFA. And we got to look back for our solutions. In spite of the attacks on our voting rights, the banning of diversity, equity, inclusion, banning of public education, and just name the problems. I think we are in maybe not in the throes of pre-Nazi type.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe that. And if you look
Absolutely.
at all the laws that are passed, not just nationally, but statewide. For example, a few weeks ago, the state of Alabama passed a law that makes it almost impossible to sue a cop. In other words, if George Floyd had been killed in Alabama this week, he probably never, his murder probably would have never been prosecuted. To me, we are so close to a police state, and a lot of people just see it directed at the illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, but our rights have been taken away at every corner, whether it's the banning of Black history or the banning of equity diversity. So to me, we got to go and look at what the people did in Mississippi and Alabama 60 years ago.
Okay.
And I don't see any effort for all these organizations to come together. And during this past Jubilee, we did have the NAACP, and several national organizations did gather together in Selma during the Jubilee. But I think it's not just enough to have one meeting, that we have to have a strategy and a vision of going forward to address this fierce attack on democracy and to take away everything we've gained.
Let me just hold on for 1 second, Hank. Let me just remind our listeners that they're listening to the Browder Files show here on WPFW 89.3 FM. And my guests today are two giants in the legal community I was going to say in Alabama, but I might as well be honest and say in the United States of America, because what you've done in Alabama has national implications. We're talking today with Faya Rose Touré and her husband, Hank Sanders. They're both attorneys. They both have dedicated their lives to the liberation of African people in courtrooms, in so many different aspects of the community in rural Alabama. So, Senator Sanders, I cut you off. Will you go ahead and say what you're going to share with our listeners?
I wanted to just go back and just say we have to understand that white supremacy is a very powerful force, and it was powerful in the 1960s. It's powerful now, but it was powerful before. It was powerful in Africa. When what's his name?
What country?
No, he's got the same birthday. I can't pull
Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba.
When Patrice Lumumba helped to throw off colonization and everything, and he only lived couple of years at the most after that. But that white supremacy is extremely powerful, and whenever you have a national leader that fans it, that makes it more powerful. When you have the most powerful country on the earth fanning that, then that makes it more powerful, not just in that country, but the world over. I wanted to say it's the same underlying force of white supremacy. Not just white superiority, but white supremacy. When something is supreme, there's no escaping it. There's no overcoming. There's no appeal from it. And so it's that force that we all dealing with. And that's why we cannot depend upon our elected leaders by themselves to do it. We cannot depend upon leaders to do it. Every one of us have a role to play in resisting this white supremacy and in resisting this impending dictatorship.
And
So,
since you mentioned the Congo, it's one of the countries that Trump has banned people from coming to America. It's not
yes.
historically, we understand that.
So, to the point that you just made, Senator Sanders, about preparing future generations, you all have been doing that through your 21st Century Youth Leadership organization, where you understood very clearly that we must be responsible for raising the children to understand our history and how history shapes the present. And through an application of historical knowledge, we can create the future. So you all have been doing that. So I mean, you're attorneys, and you all could have retired by now with millions of dollars in the bank and be living large if you just stuck to law practice. But you decided to branch out. You have an ancient African history, slavery and Civil War museum. You've got the National Voting Rights Museum. You've done all these other things to help raise the consciousness of the people in your community. What was it that kept you from just settling in for a good time, making your money through your practice of law or in the Alabama state legislature, and just making some money, living large, and forgetting about this struggle? What was your motivation?
Let me give you an example. 2 weeks ago, several months ago, we had planned to have a 21st century camp, youth leadership camp. But a lot of adults connected to me said, oh, that's not a good idea. The children are incorrigible unless you do a background check on everybody to make sure that they're going to be safe. It was just to me, unexplainable. So I came there and I said, I don't think I'm going to have this camp. It's just too much trouble. None of the kids have any money, but that wasn't a major problem. But then it came to me that the kind of camp the young people needed, they needed another kind of underground railroad. And in order to make this camp successful and effective, we created the Underground Railroad. But this Underground Railroad, after teaching them about the original, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about that. We took them on the Underground Railroad to free themselves from mental slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to what Carter G. Woodson said in his book, Miseducation of the Negro, it is not the lynching of the neck, but the lynching of the mind, the greatest danger in our time. And being aware of that, just knowing that our children's minds have been lynched, that they're mental slaves and their parents are mental slaves. I have no choice, I have no choice but to stay involved. And even though I came close to counseling that camp because I was frustrated, I even got a cold. Seemed like all the physical barriers were there, but the words of Carter G. Woodson kept coming to me.
Mm-hmm.
It is the lynching. It's not the lynching of the neck, but the lynching of the mind. And that's what motivates me. We have to, and you do this, that's how I met you. Met you first in the 21st century, not at the Jubilee.
Mm-hmm.
And we were then using African history, and we did it again. How to free the mind, how to rid the mind of all these stereotypes and negativities of Black people that is reinforced in the negative rap music and the misinformation about American history and Black history. So my motivation is just those words. As long as we are having mental lynchings, to me, it's just as dangerous, or even more dangerous than the physical lynchings, because they physically lynch thousands, but they are mentally lynched millions.
Well, that's true. That's true. And for many of those who have been victims of mental lynching, for them, death is simply not dying. They are the walking dead.
Yes.
Yeah.
And are not making any significant contribution to
Yes.
their lives, their family lives, or the lives of their community. So I admire the work that you're doing. And I can say that because I'm doing the same work. So, the spirit in me recognizes the spirit in both of you all. and we certainly have our work cut out for us. But I would say this, that what I found over the years of doing this work, that generally my audience grows larger during times of a Republican administration. See, because we get comfortable when a Barack Obama is in office, when a
Yes,
Joe Biden is in office, when a Democrat is in office, and we think that we've made it, we think that we've arrived. But what we fail to understand is something that Hank, you were referencing earlier, and it goes back to I think it's one of Newton's law of physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So there are laws passed granting us the right to vote, granting us the right to work in any establishment, and then there are forces behind the scenes who believe in their own supremacy, who will begin to make plans to undermine those laws. And for me, I see Project 2025 was probably created right after the Voting Rights Acts were passed in the 1960s. White folks
yes,
saw what was coming,
that's right.
and they knew what the long-term implications of Black folk voting, Black
Hmm.
folk gaining jobs and gaining education. They knew that it would jeopardize their position to hold us down, so they began plotting to undermine all of that, and we're witnessing the implementation of those plans right now.
That's right.
And I can't understand for the life of me why more of our people don't see that. So I only take comfort in the fact for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Then for the uptick in anti-Black sentiments, there has to be a corresponding uptick in pro-Black sentiments, which means that we've got to get more people to awaken. We've got to get more people to become conscious of what's happening, to raise their children to be leaders, and to become fearless leaders in the spirit of Medgar Evers, in the spirit of the two of you, in the spirit of Amelia Boynton and all the others that you've been talking about here on this show. So what do you see? What are your recommendations as to what can be done right now in order to amplify the spirit that's required in order to move us forward? And let me say this, and I want you to consider this in your responses. We're talking about Patrice Lumumba and Medgar Evers, two brothers who were separated by thousands and thousands of miles. But what I know is that Africans on the continent, Africans in the Caribbean, Africans in South America have always been inspired by the actions of Africans in America. When we do things, we change the world, and everybody emulates us. So the key to maintaining white supremacy is suppressing us here, suppressing us at the source. And if you diminish the source of the power here in the United States, then you likewise diminish its potential to spread around the world. So what can be done now in order to amplify this energy, this consciousness that's so sorely needed?
Well, let me frame it with two thoughts. One thought is that there's a West African proverb that says mighty rivers are filled drop by drop. So a lot of people recognize the problem, some aspect of the problem, but they feel like it's so massive, so widespread, so overwhelming till whatever they do will not make any difference. And we have to have faith to put our drops down, because our one drop will run together with a second drop and run together with third, fourth drop. Those drops become strict little streams, and then they become bigger streams and eventually become rivers. And it takes faith to put your drop down when you don't see how it's going to run together. You have to have faith. The second thing is, right now, when you see something in an early stage, it's easier to head it off.
Yes.
And banning of books that's dealing with African American is a sign. So we have to start fighting the banning of books, because the banning of books is one step away from the burning of books. And burning of books is one step away from burning of human beings. You don't have to go any further than to look back at Germany in the 1930s and the 1940s. It started with banning of books, and then they started burning books. And there wasn't long before they were literally burning human beings. Mm-hmm. There's always been a movement in this country to ban Black folks from this country, Africans from this country. And so we have to fight things on every front. And if you don't want to get out and march in the street, if you just do what you can to circumvent the banning of books, that's a start. And then you can always grow into other things, but you have to have a faith.
Those are words of wisdom from Hank Sanders, attorney, former state senator from Alabama, freedom fighter. Yes, Faya, you wanted to add something to that?
I just think it's imperative that we work with the children. I really do. And I don't think that enough organizations and churches are working with them. And even when they work with them, our service means, picking up the paper, picking up litter, going to the nursing home. We are not trying to break the mental chains of our children. There are not enough organizations. You have all these sororities and fraternities that do service work, but how many of them are actually ending the miseducation of the children? That's one thing. We got to do that systematically. I tell people in 4 years from now, these 14-year-olds will be voters. Okay. And but there's not enough attention. The second thing is we got to be more pragmatic and thoughtful when we elect Black people to office. We have made too many mistakes putting people in office who have no vision and have no connection with the history and not even a need to serve our people. In the city of Selma, the Board of Education is all Black. The superintendent is all Black. Yet there's not a single course, not even about the civil rights movement in public schools, not even an elective, Tony. And that's true. Black history. That's true, I think, throughout Alabama and probably other states. So how do we expect people to even conceive that there's a problem? A lot of our people don't even know there's a problem, especially our young people. Mm-hmm. So I think that the two things is we just got to systematically work with our young people at all levels. And we got to use creative ways to teach them the history. When we started them on the Underground Railroad to free themselves from mental chains, we started with ancient Africa, mm-hmm. But we have a major election in Selma next month. But half the people are running out don't even have a clue. When I lost my case because a local Black police officer illegally arrested me, clearly illegally. I won't give you all the facts, but the state Supreme Court sanctioned it, said you had a right to elect that 75-year-old woman, because that was 5 years ago. I'm 80 now, the case is just coming down. But if we had a city government that was accountable, that recognized the past injustices and were committed to correcting those injustices, my case never would have reached the Supreme Court. Because when that cop illegally arrested me, or illegally arrested that young brother for a marijuana charge, or whatever charge, the local government would have brought us justice. We would not have had to appeal to a racist Supreme Court. So those are the two things: working with our youth and making sure that we are politically engaged, but we vote for people who are right, not for people that we like.
Let me ask both of you a question as we wind down. I've got 5 more minutes, and I'd like to get your honest assessment. If Medgar Evers were alive today, what would he think about the status of Blacks in Mississippi, Alabama, and America in general? How do you think he would feel?
Medgar Evers would be pained not just in his heart, but pain in his soul. And the reason for that is that when you have spent a lifetime fighting against these kinds of white supremacy, not only tendencies, but actions, and then all of a sudden you see it slipping back, then, and you've spent your life fighting that, he would be pained. But Medgar Evers would, in spite of being pained, he'd still be on the front line of resistance because he had a kind of faith that allowed him to go forward in Mississippi when he knew that death was just lurking around every corner because of the work he was doing. He would still have that faith, and he would still go forth, and he would still keep fighting.
And it was that faith that led his wife to continue to seek justice for his murderer. It took her 30 years, but the man who, I think it was 2 trials, but the 3rd trial, he got a conviction and he died in jail. And I think it's the faith that his wife continues to demonstrate. We actually honored them as the couple of the struggle at the Jubilee this year, recognizing that faith and the power of that union. But I believe that throughout our history, I don't care how bad things got, even in the midst of the horrific slavery. Slavery is so atrocious that Frederick Douglass said it would embarrass a nation of savages. We have always had resistors. And even though you cannot always visibly see those signs of resistance, I'm reminded of a story. You know about people like Amelia Boynton, but you don't know the stories about a sister who she's no longer with us. She worked as a maid in Selma, and she never participated in a march or demonstration, but she organized All Spits Day, and she organized all the domestic workers in Selma, and they chose a day out of every month during the movement to spit in the oppressor's food. So,
Wait. Say that All Spits Day. Okay.
Then you an article I wrote about it. Miss Ethel Washington, that was her way of rebelling. And we've always had resistance. So we've always found ways to resist in the midst of so much hardships. Like I told the young people when I took them to the museum this past Saturday, I said, you are a survivor. I said, the very fact that you're here in this makeshift slave ship, you are a survivor. And we're survivors. And we've survived because of the ingenious and consistent, creative ways that Black people have found to resist throughout history.
All right. Well, listen, let me just let my listeners know that we have been sharing this past hour with Faya Rose Touré and her husband, Hank Sanders, 2 living giants. And this station, WPFW, is celebrating 12 hours from noon to midnight, celebrating from Mississippi to the Congo 100 years of Lumumba and Medgar. And my show will be followed by a special show with Joni Eisenberg, where she will be interviewing 2 very near and dear friends of yours, Dr. Joyce Ladner and Dr. Frank Smith. So before we leave, do you want to give them a shout out? And
shout out. I haven't seen them in years. You're right. They're great, wonderful people.
You know, and it's interesting the times that I was down in Selma, you know, watching you older heads get together and commemorate and commiserate around your involvement in the student sit-ins and demonstrations in the 60s when you all were in your 20s, right? So you've been able to maintain this fierce dedication to a cause much bigger than yourselves, and I'm so proud to be able to say that I know you and to be able to learn from you and use you as an example for what I want to be and who I want to be when I grow up. I want to be just like y'all.
We want to be like you.
So yeah, so I want to thank you so much for taking
And
some
we
time.
thank you for your work. Great work.
Tony, give me a moment to say we have the Jubilee every year and encourage your listeners to prepare to come for the 61st. It will be the first full weekend in March, and they can find out more by going to our website, selmabridgecrossingjubilee.com.
SelmaBridgeCrossingJubilee.com. And you have a whole host of activities actually leading up to the Jubilee celebration on that Sunday with the reenactment of the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So there's a whole host of activities. And how long have you all been having the Jubilee?
34 years.
34 years. 34 years.
Yeah, but we've been not celebrating, we have been commemorating Bloody Sunday for a lot more years.
60 years.
Yeah.
At least 55.
Mm-hmm. For sure, for sure. Well, you all have certainly been Jegnas in the true sense of the word. A Jegna is a defender of the culture. So you have kept the memory of countless foot soldiers alive. You've been a source of inspiration for tens of thousands of people in Alabama and around the world. And I thank you all for your tireless dedication. And I want you all to know that I love you. I love you both. I
love you.
Love you. And give my baby a big kiss and hug and your daughter.
I sure will. I sure will.
Thank you, Tony.
You're
Hope
welcome.
to see you soon.
You're welcome. I look forward to it. So
Okay.
you've been listening to Faya Rose Touré and her husband, Hank Sanders, sharing their reflections about Medgar Evers and the struggles that they have been involved in. This is Tony Browder, and I'll see you next week, leaving you with a little bit of love and peace.